One. So we are going to call to order the Planning Commission meeting at City Hall here Wednesday, April 19th, 2023, 6 o'clock. Do we have Commissioner Marone online? Can we just sort that out right off the bat?
Nope, not there.
We do not. Okay, very good. We're going to call this to order and we're going to ask for a roll call. James, please.
Marone. Gorham.
Here.
Woodward.
Here.
Stangline.
Here.
Duval.
Here.
Yeager.
Yes. Very good. And we'll start this off with item 3, the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. We'll move on to item number 4. This is an approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
if I could, I would recommend that we move item 6B to after item 7A on our agenda, and I would move to approve the agenda with that change.
Okay, we have a motion to alter the agenda, moving item 6B after 7A. Do we have a second on that?
Second, Gorham.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And motion carries. Thank you. Okay, approval of the minutes. This is item 5. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Gorham,
Second.
second by Woodard. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. And motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item 6. This is unfinished business. This is item 6A. This is the proposed ordinance to amend the section 515-4-A outdoor lighting and hold public. We will be holding a public hearing before we open that public hearing. James, could you please set us up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the last Planning Commission meeting, the Commission directed staff to review the performance standards of residential and commercial outdoor lighting and to revise language for architectural lighting, landscape lighting, and fixtures that were attached to structures. So as proposed in the ordinance, architectural and landscape lighting are permitted if the bulb or light source is directed or shielded from view by an observer at 5 feet above grade at the nearest property and shall not be directed into the night sky. There is an exemption for flag pole lighting as well as path lighting for this. Also, light fixtures attached to structures shall not exceed the height of the structure and shall be fully recessed or shielded from view by an observer at 5 feet above grade at the nearest property line. Something that we've been continuing to work on that is still within the ordinance is color temperature standards, dimmable lighting requirements, as well as working the public, semi-public district to conform to the pole light standards for residential properties, which is the 13 to 20 feet. And then staff is also recommending parks. We did not have an assigned district for parks or a standard for pole lighting for parks, so that would be also included into their staff's recommendation. And then with this as well, staff did realize that the general commercial zoning district, which in the proposed lighting or approved lighting from City Council in our previous code was 20 to 25 feet. In this code, it was put back to 13 to 20 feet as part of our revised zoning code from Swanson Hascamp. Staff does recommend some discussion on this tonight, but within the ordinance, staff did put it back at 20 to 25 feet within this amended ordinance. So with that, staff recommends approval of the ordinance as proposed, as well as holding a public hearing.
Very good. Thank you, James. So at this time, do we have any questions for? Sorry, what's that?
Did amend the agenda.
It was to move 6B after 7A. Yes, we did. It was to move 6B after 7A. Yep, no problem. Very good. Do we have any questions for staff before we open the public hearing? Okay, no questions for staff. At this time, I'm going to open the public hearing at 6:05. If anyone would like to speak on this proposed ordinance, now is the time to come forward. I'm going to open it at 6:05. Call for anyone to speak that would like to. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. And I'm going to close the public hearing at also 6:05. And we're going to move on to testimony and alternatives, please. So we're going to bring it back to us. Any discussion items on this?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please, Mr. Duval.
I would recommend that we keep the general commercial district with the pole height standards that are in the current ordinance. This is as it was originally proposed when we first developed the lighting ordinance a number of years ago, and it was incorrectly interpreted to mean that if you had a general commercial, then it was the B4 district. You would have to spread a multitude of 13-foot-high poles throughout your parking lot, and that was the piece that really resulted in the change of the ordinance to just going to the 20 feet. That's an incorrect interpretation of what that ordinance did and what this ordinance does, which is that when you're at your perimeter, you can have a 13-foot-high light source, light pole, and you don't have to do any gymnastics or anything. If you want to go higher, you can go to 20, but you have to now contain that higher light within your property bounds, meeting that 5-foot-high standard at the property line. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable approach, and we have examples that are pretty darn close to that in our city right now. The hospital parking lot is similar to that, but the higher poles that they use in the interior of the parking lot don't meet the shielding criteria that this light ordinance does, but they have the lower ones along this perimeter, along the sidewalks and the edge of their parking lot. And you can imagine a situation where that you blend these two to meet your lighting needs on the property. So you don't have to have a bunch of small 13-foot poles spread throughout to be able to give you lighting. You can raise up. So it's actually the opportunity to have a blend. It's not an either or, it's using the ordinance as it's worded to get the product that you want. So James, do you have or Sean, do you have a drawing? This is a sketch that I had done back in the original, and this is kind of what the example would be for the general commercial standard that's the residential. You would have in the corner of the sidewalk there, that's a 13-foot high, and that light can spill out past the property line, right? But as you go in, you've got these higher poles that are meeting the less than or equal to the 20-foot standard, and that light has to cut off at that property line at that 5-foot high. So that would be an example of how someone can design their parking lot, like a Cub Foods or something, can design their parking lot so that they have the 13-foot standard near the perimeter, and then they can have the higher poles interior, and it gives them the lighting of the areas they feel is essential. And so that I would propose that we leave that standard for general commercial as it is in our current ordinance now, with the maximum pole height being 13 feet, with the option to go to 20 if the light is contained to no higher than 5. The fixture is shielded so that it's not visible above 5 feet at the property line.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Duval, and you echoed my thoughts exactly. So any further discussion on this?
Quick question for Commissioner Duval. Are you talking 2E? Is that the point you're looking at?
Yeah, so in 2D, the general commercial is struck and inserted into 2E, and I would say to just leave that general commercial within 2D.
Okay. I like it.
Very good. Discussion, please. Yes.
James, we're going to need more pictures when we go to the council.
I like this picture. This is,
I mean,
this is,
it's not in the packet. Like, we're gonna need this picture or something
Yeah,
similar.
we'll include this picture with it, and then we also have a couple other pictures in here that shows you the light fixtures
Yep,
that
I
do
saw
work.
those.
Yep, so hopefully that
We'll
helps as
definitely
well.
need those too.
make
Yep.
and model is that vehicle, by the way?
Well, it's a very simple, it's one of the earlier Daihatsus, I
Got
think.
it.
that
I
were-
was just curious. But I like the diagrammatical. Yes, exactly. Any further discussion? Would someone care to fashion a motion here?
Mr. Chair,
Please.
I recommend and I move that I find my papers here. Recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending section 515-4-8 with the exception that we're going to leave the general commercial standard in section 2D and removing the suggestion that we put it in 2E.
Very good. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
We have a second. Do we have any discussion? I just want to say thanks to everyone who has worked on this lighting ordinance for the last, what seems like 7 years.
Yeah.
But I think we're finally to a point of where we can pass this along and feel good about it. So we have a motion, a second, no further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign, and motion carries. Very good. Excellent. So we are going to, with the amended, with our amended agenda, we are going to actually move on to item 7A now, which is to consider the conditional use permit for recycling facility at 1021 Madison Street. James, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Green Forest Environmental Solutions, CO, applied for a conditional use permit to operate a recycling facility at 1021 Madison Street. They recycle various grades of paper and paper-like products sourced from greater Minnesota area and surrounding states and does not accept drop-off or local collection of these materials. 1021 Madison Street is in a general industrial zoning district, and the table of uses permits recycling facilities as a conditional use. The property is currently operating as a recycling facility at 1021 Madison Street. The property owner was unaware of the need for a conditional use permit, but the property owner has been very cooperative with the department on all required submittals and has contacted the fire marshal and building official. They were out for an inspection as well to help complete this conditional use permit report. So with that, I'll highlight and talk about some of the main conditions within the allowed use section that really pertain to their use as a recycling facility in here. The first one is the storage of refuse or garbage materials in any front yard is prohibited. There's no indication on the plan or visiting the property that garbage storage or recycling the storage is in the parcel's front yard. Also, vehicle parking and storage areas are screened from view of neighboring uses, abutting residential zoning districts and public right-of-ways. The applicant has proposed an 8-foot chain link fence with slats on the plan that has been provided for the outdoor storage area from neighboring uses. Also, all trailers, vehicles, and containers in which recycled products are visible will be required to park in the screened-in area. Staff's interpretation is this would not include like employee vehicles or vehicles typically found in industrial areas. Also, vehicle parking and storage areas shall be surfaced with a bituminous material. The parking area is currently surfaced with that material. The site shall be maintained free of litter and any other undesirable materials and will be cleaned of loose debris on a daily basis. The applicant has proposed a maintenance plan for their first and second shift leads to include outside yard cleanup with their daily schedule of shift cleanup. Provisions are made to control and minimize noise, air, and water pollution. The processing of the recycled materials occurs inside the building on the premise, which helps shield noise from neighboring uses. And the last one that I'll discuss is the proposed use shall not involve any element or cause any condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to any other persons or property. So really with this one, this is kind of part of the building review as well as the fire marshal's review. There's a number of conditions that staff is going to recommend related to this item to help make this safe for surrounding uses, specifically for fire purposes. So with that, staff does recommend approval of the conditional use permit for 1021 Madison Street with the following conditions to the permit. that there is require a code analysis prepared by a Minnesota licensed architect for the facility located at 1021 Madison Street in Brainerd, is to be submitted to the city of Brainerd within 6 months of approval of the conditional use permit. If the code analysis shows a change of occupancy classification, the facility is to be brought up to the requirements of Minnesota building codes within 1 year of the code analysis findings. Also, I spoke with the fire marshal. There's an indoor diesel tank storage that must be removed outdoors within 4 months of approval of the conditional use permit. All other requirements of the fire marshal, there's some minor electrical things, storage things that have to be done, must be corrected within 1 month of approval of the conditional use permit. All paved areas, which includes a storage area, must maintain a 20-foot wide fire lane at all times, and the required fencing must be installed within 6 months of approval of the conditional use permit. So staff does recommend with those conditions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Kramvik. At this time, I'd like to open it up for any questions for staff regarding this CUP. Please.
Question. James, is this a unique facility? Is there any other paper recycling facility, or is this unique in town?
I don't believe so. We do have other recycling facilities. We have the metal recycling facility, but I do not believe there's any other paper recycling facilities.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Yes, please.
How, and I'm going to start by asking you, because you're the one there. How did they find out that they needed a conditional use permit, you know? Like, how did they make this discovery?
I believe the fire marshal saw this, as, just kind of in his drive around inspection, saw some of the paper storage out there, and just kind of asked the community development staff about it. So then I looked up the use section with industrial uses, and that's when I found that. We reached out to the property owner by phone first, and then kind of sent them that official letter, and from there they worked with staff to get all required submittals.
Okay.
Fantastic. Any other questions for staff? All right, hearing none, we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing, 6:17. This is the time for anyone to come forward on the that would like to speak on this CUP. If you'd like to come forward, now's the time. Do you have anyone online? No? Please, James.
And the applicant may be here. There might be a time to also have them.
Fantastic. I'll ask them, applicant, if they would like to come up and walk us through it as well. Yeah, fantastic. Now's the time. Please just state your name, address, and all that jazz, and we'll get you.
Jeff Grunwald. I own Green Forest Recycling at 1021 Madison Street. I must say the cooperation with the city has been great, and they've been very kind in helping us get through this process. What we do at Green Forest, again, there's nothing residential. We take a lot of paper from Canada, and we process that material into a clean paper pack that we can sell to companies that make insulation, egg cartons, and ceiling tile. About 75% of the stuff that we produce stays within the state of Minnesota, and we're just kind of at the very beginning of this. Our growth with the electronic world that's going on, there's not a lot of paper out there, and the companies that make like molded fiber bowls and utensils, there's a huge need for paper. So we're in a unique situation where we can provide that fiber for them to make their materials. So and that's primarily about 75% what we do there. We do get some material, some cardboard that comes in from, within the 5-state region, and some printers material that comes in within the 5-state region, but that's a smaller portion of what we do. So,
Thank you, Mr. Grunwald. Do we have any questions for the applicant here? Yes, please, Mr. Duval.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Grunwald, for being here tonight. Question on where does the transfer of materials from where they're being delivered in that vehicle happen? Is it inside the building? Do they come into the building and then that material is offloaded, or is it done outside?
it's done inside. It's
Inside.
all on our trailers. So
Okay, so the likelihood of paper flying up and away here in the routine handling of that product is minimized by having it
Minimized,
inside.
yes. At one point, we handled a lot of plastic, contract with a national company that they dropped the material outside, but we since canceled that contract, and we've in the process of cleaning all that material up, and our goal within the next 2 months is to have all that cleaned up, and it's won't have any issues with any flying debris. So,
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Grunwald?
I have a couple questions.
Yes, please.
This one for sure. I drove by today, the operation, and are the trailers your trailers, or the trailers that are just being used? And because I saw, I don't know, 24 trailers. Is that what I saw? Something maybe today.
yep, that's right. About 24 trailers. A lot of them are ours, but a lot of them you probably saw are from companies that have come in to pick up them. 'Cause usually the middle of the week is when it's gets really busy with mills they want to pick up so that they can have it delivered by before the weekend.
And I saw some trucks with corporate logos. I was wondering maybe they're backloading, doing backloads back or something like this with the stopping by and picking up.
Yes.
Is that what they're doing after they do a drop off and they pick it up?
Yep.
What percent, is there a percentage of your recycled materials, it's kind of off the subject, but I'm just curious,
Yeah.
that is post-consumer? Is it any post-consumer, or is it all just, is it part of the industrial process?
Right now, it's part of, most of it's part of the industrial process. There's some of the materials that we get from the businesses, the businesses will have something for their employees to bring materials in. But again, that's it's all inside the trailer and that. And we do have a drop-off for local businesses for cardboard. There's a number of them that will come in, and we just open our door and it'll bring everything in. Our staff, they'll meet with our staff and work with that. So it works out pretty well. There's a number of businesses that will take advantage of that, so it's kind of neat to see. So
And because then they don't have to hire a hauler to.
exactly, yep.
They can
yep,
just.
yep, they
direct
drop it
in.
off for free anytime. So
Last question, I promise. Are the materials just being like compacted together, or do you grind them and put them together? I'm just curious about the process.
no, let's say like the cardboard and the printer's waste will go right into the baler and be baled up.
Okay.
Into a 1,400 pound bale. And a lot of like the printer's waste, we work with a company that just opened up in Duluth, SD Paper. All of our material goes up to there for the printer's material. The news from Canada, we run, we probably get 5-6 loads of that a week from Canada. It comes in, it gets broken apart and runs through our sort system. I mean, I invite anyone, if they're interested, I'd love to give them a tour of that. It's, we got robots and optical sorters and all that stuff. So it's kind of fun to watch see what's actually in the recycling world and the new technology. So
What percentage of things have to get fished out and go right to a dumpster? Just out of curiosity.
our goal is to be within 5%.
Okay.
So we want to try to recycle 95%. And we're even trying to get 100% sustainable. So we're working with a company in Woodbury that's actually I'm meeting with next week to be able to take our residuals and be able to turn that into diesel fuel.
Interesting.
So,
Well, thank you
yep.
very much.
You bet.
Good. Any other questions for Mr. Grunwald? All right, thank you, Mr. Grunwald.
Well, thank you.
At this point, the public hearing is still open. If anyone else would like to come up and speak in favor or opposed or so forth, this is the time. First call, second call, and third call. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing here at 6:23. Bring it back to us for any comment, questions for staff or so forth. Now's the time. Mr. Kramvik, question I have is, any complaints received? Is this property been a contentious property for any adjoining neighbors or so forth over the last couple of years? I mean, as far as you know, Mr. Kramvik?
Not from a community development standpoint. I think there may have been a few calls for trailers on the street for parking, but, since I've been by there lately, I haven't seen as much of an issue on that.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kramvik. All right. So with that, any continuing conversation, or I would absolutely entertain a motion here.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit with the 6 requirements that are listed here as the staff recommendations.
Very good, thank you. We have a motion to approve with the attached recommendations by Mr. Gorham. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a couple seconds here. I'm going to give it to Stang. Was it Stangline? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to give it to Woodward here. Very good. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Mr. Kramvik, would you please give any direction to the applicant here as to next steps?
Yeah, so this item will be heard at the next city council meeting, which will be on May 1st at 7:30 in the council chambers. That'll be the final approval or denial. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to reverse kind of backwards to item 6B. This is our off-street parking regulations and review of other communities. Mr. Kramvik, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll kind of open this up and give a brief introduction here. Planning Commission did direct staff to review multiple cities and how their ordinances look compared to ours, as well as some things that they've added that we might be able to take from as well. So Dylan was the one that actually he reached out to different entities as well as reviewed their code, so he's going to take the primary lead on the review.
Mr. Edwards, please.
All right. At the last meeting of this body, we were directed at the Community Development Department to provide research into off-street parking ordinances on the books in similarly sized Minnesota cities. We also selected and interviewed colleagues in other regions to determine how some of the parking policies that have been floated around actually go into practice, how they've actually impacted local land development. So Brainerd's existing code, just to give a sort of brief summary, regulates off-street parking through 36 different space requirements based on a variety of different uses. Currently, these are exempted in 5 zoning districts, all of which are commercial in nature. Probably the 2 parking requirements that we end up dealing with most are the single-family duplex and accessory dwelling unit parking, which is 2 spaces per unit, and then the attached single-family dwellings, multifamily, and manufactured homes within manufactured home parks, which is 2 1/4 spaces are required per unit. On projects involving 8 or more units, the city may require additional clustered guest parking based on a calculation. These can create some relatively large parking footprints. So we looked at the cities of Bemidji, Alexandria, Fergus Falls, Moorhead, and Winona in the state, basically choosing these both based on similar population size and general economic character. And then we looked at Superior, Wisconsin, Branson, Missouri, and Culver City, California, outside of the general region to gauge what some of these parking policies that we'll look at in the last section sort of the memo, how they actually have been put into practice. So for the city of Bemidji, their formula for determining off-street parking minimums is relatively similar to ours. For residential uses, there's 1 space per bedroom, which can actually be more intensive at creating parking than the city of Brainerd's. Alexandria requires 2 spaces per dwelling unit on multifamily, 1/4 space per unit less than ours. Fergus Falls utilizes a 1.5 space minimum, which is lower than ours by 3/4 of a space. And Moorhead is the greatest difference and also the most complex of the systems, with a tiered system where there's 1.5 spaces for efficiencies, 2 spaces for any 1 to 2 bedroom and 2.5 spaces for any 3 or more bedroom units. Coincidentally, they also have a lower minimum on church seating and structured parking standards for agreements on cooperative parking sharing to make sure that those parking lots maintained by multiple businesses are getting maintained. City of Winona changed their off-street parking regulations in 2021, adopting a zero-space requirement in the city center and business district, much like Brainerd also did. Their zero-space minimum, however, also extends to any dwelling structures with 7 units or less. The residential requirement for apartments and attached rows houses is 1 space per unit. Additionally, developers may offset parking by creating 4 bicycle spaces per each parking space they forego installing. And this sort of demonstrates what a similar sized city going sort of a little step beyond what Brainerd has looks like policy-wise. Superior, Wisconsin implemented all non-residential parking minimums being removed and opted to control parking on most projects through the conditional use permit process. Their parking requirement for residential units is 1 space per unit. And discussion with planning officials, when I actually called in and talked with people at the planning department in Superior, Wisconsin, they noted that they've seen quite a bit of developers that actually chose to move development plans to Superior over Duluth based on the parking requirements because they did not have to put in the same kind of footprint. It also, their implementation of this policy led to a spike in mutual parking agreements where businesses would go in together because basically existing businesses that didn't need some of the parking that they had in their most densely built parts of the city could basically rent out parking area that they had to satisfy not minimum, but requirements and needs for those other businesses. Branson, Missouri instituted these minimums. We didn't actually get a chance to speak with them, but they had a more complex tiered system with 1 space per studio, 1.5 spaces per 1 bedroom, 2 spaces per 2 bedroom, 2.5 per 3 bedroom, and then 2.5 spaces plus an additional half space for each bedroom above 3, and then 1 for every 5 units clustered on multifamily dwellings. Culver City, California, which was probably the most different municipality that we talked to and looked at, as it is a 40,000 population suburb of Los Angeles. They eliminated all of their minimums, and it simplified their ordinance by about 12 pages, which, according to them, made their developers very happy. Planning Department also noted significant increases in permits to redevelop existing parking areas into more profitable uses. So a lot of their restaurants were converting existing parking area into more outside seating, generally things along that line. It also caused a massive proliferation of accessory dwelling units because that off-street parking requirement also extended to residential uses and garages. A lot of property owners took it upon themselves to file permits, turn garages into accessory dwelling units, and offset California housing prices with rentals. Staff recommendations, we really come to the list of 10 sort of policy items that we're leaving at your hands for review, and sort of what you think based on where we're at with the research.
Yeah, so I think our intention with this is to kind of go one by one with these to get some direction from Planning Commission, thoughts and considerations for us to then be able to start working on drafting a code.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. So just to be clear, staff is looking for the planning commission to discuss the findings here, and upon their input, I think we're just going to take these one by one. We're just going to kind of talk through them a little bit here. So we're just going to start off with number one, maybe give us just a little bit of background, and then we'll just open it up for discussion amongst the group here, if that's okay. So item number one is review non-residential uses in residential zoning districts and their space requirements.
Yep, so thank you, Mr. Chair. So this one, non-residential uses in residential zoning districts and their space requirements. This one's really related to kind of the findings within the Moorhead one, where they had less space for like churches. So things that you typically find in residential zoning districts would be specifically churches and schools. So they're not exempted through our current zoning code because they are a residential zoning district. So how do we want to approach this? Do we want to have, some type of thing, that we have right now, which discusses uses, discusses required parking spaces, and try to limit size, or do we just exempt some of these uses within our neighborhoods because we're not wanting to see parking lot expansion within those neighborhoods? So I think that's kind of the discussion on this one. Do we want to take the approach that we have now of regulating uses and number of spaces, or, not have a requirement?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Kramvik. So we're not necessarily looking for motions on all of this work. We're just hoping to have a discussion here and try to get a general consensus to pass on so that we can craft amending our section here. So does anyone, I'm going to open this up to the group here. Do we have any thoughts on item number one? We got 9 to go. So, yes, please.
Hopefully a quick question. So with the church requirement, it's like 1 per 5 or 1 per 4. There are a lot of churches that they aren't filling their pews, right? So is it based on how many potential people they could squeeze into their church?
I believe it would be.
Not the 15 diehards who actually come on a
Yep.
snowy Sunday? Okay.
So it's based on occupancy of the building,
Yep, that's correct.
Potential.
potential occupancy.
Easter.
Yes.
Black Friday scenario.
A lot of people go to church on Easter. I noticed that. Yes. Very good. Anyone? I'm going to jump in here. Just generally, my general feeling is that I feel like we should be trending towards parking maximums, not minimums in general here. I'm not sure how that applies to, 1 through 10, but much to your point, I think that we have a tendency to vastly overbuild parking lots for the what if and those rare occasions. And my general leaning is on this one, as well as many of the others, is to lean towards some system of maximums, not minimums, including churches and otherwise. So that's my 2 cents here.
Quick question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
Would you be in favor of just abolishing the minimums or reducing the minimums?
That's a complicated question with a complicated answer, but in general, I think when I drive through Brainerd and I look at a lot of our properties that are, for instance, on Highway 210, and I just look at them and I say, what if we would have put, for instance, a parking maximum on this particular project? How different would it look? And in general terms, I think that most of them would look better if more landscaping was incorporated in, less structure, less parking. Parking lots and parking surfaces are used by a developer because they're easy to maintain, they're easy to develop, and they're easy to just get done and be done with. And I think in a lot of ways that works adversely to the aspects of what a property could actually look like as pleasing to the eye. So I would generally like to see across the board some version of a maximum instituted, as I think we've seen in a couple other municipalities that have played out. But That's a very global answer.
But go back to minimums, do you see minimums staying in place or going away in certain places?
I think that generally I would like to see maximums in place, not minimums.
So getting rid of the minimums.
Correct.
That's what I was getting at.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's just me.
That's all right.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
I was intrigued, I think at the last meeting, you were talking about, well, you just kind of mentioned here too, what an entrance to our city could look like driving by commercial properties if they weren't dominated by cars. I had the pleasure of being quoted in the paper saying if a business owner if she wants to put in 500 spaces, she can go ahead and put in 500 spaces. Kind of what I was getting at with that. What I was getting at makes great, it's great for the dispatch.
Correcting the
well, I'm a quote machine, but what I'm getting at is it bothers me that we sit around in these rooms and we tell people how many parking spots they can have. That bugs me. So I was intrigued reading about the idea of using increasing green space, limiting the amount of impervious space you use as an incentive to reduce parking. I think it was Bemidji that's doing something like that. I'd like to know more about what they're doing. I love that approach, where as opposed to saying, no, you can only have 275 parking spots instead of 250, or, the other way around. Instead of saying that, what we're saying is, this is your percentage. You've used up 92% of your area on impervious. If that's too much, you have to bring it back to 75. You figure out how to get back to 75. I'm just picking those numbers, but I like that approach because it allows business to be creative in how they do it and how they use their land, and gets us to where we want to get at, which is less parking lots and more aesthetically pleasing experience.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so hearing no further, yes, please.
I think leaving things more open to the businesses to decide what they need, and having a maximum or having things done by impervious surface requirements allows a business to come in and say, most of our business is primarily drive-through at this point, and we don't want to undergo the development expense of having to put in 20 parking spaces because of the square footage of the business, or because there might be a meeting once a year that fills up all of these seats, but perhaps leaving it up to the business to determine what their needs are and what would allow that business to meet their financial goals and requirements. And rather than being restrictive with our city code, we leave it up to the entrepreneurs to decide what benefits their business plan and what keeps their business healthy and viable, rather than arbitrary regulations.
Got it. Anyone else?
Make just one more point, Mr. Chair, if that's okay.
Yes.
I was kind of interested in the notion too of shared parking. In the communities that do the shared parking, are these formal legal agreements, or are these just like, hey, on Thursdays we have nothing here, et cetera? How does it work?
Yeah, I think if the planning commission is interested in that, we'll do probably a little bit more research on how they regulate that. I know, I'm sure some of it's by council action that they're agreeing to this. We're not requiring parking in this instance because there's an agreement here. Probably similar to what we did with our deferred parking, where it took council action for it. But right now, we don't really have anything outlined in the code to share spaces. So I think, adding something to easily let business developers or owners know how that shared space would work, I think that would be a good opportunity there. And we could further research that and put that into code if planning commission's interest in.
Anyone else? I just want to comment a little bit on Teresa's comments. So I think there's a fine line that needs to be hypothetically drawn between. So if you ask a business, they're going to say, well, it's easiest for us to just pave this entire entire parking lot. This is our need, this entire parking lot. So I'm not sure how exactly we would go about it, but I think there's a fine line between saying, this is our need for parking for this event and for customers and such, but not necessarily just letting them pave the entire landmass because it's easy to maintain and they don't have to mow it. So I'm not sure there's a middle ground there, but that's my general thought. Yes, Mr. Kramvik.
One idea that just kind of came to mind is, you could, instead of maybe looking at an impervious surface percentage, because that includes building too, so you have some lots that are small where they might want to do a building over the entire lot, say in town center district. But what if there is potential for, a maximum parking lot percentage allowed, per lot? That could be a way to kind of combine those things to where, a lot so big, you're allowed this percentage of, off-street parking per lot. That would then, maybe limit size based on buildings. Here's your parking, and then this is what's required for green space. So it could still allow, theoretically in some of these districts up to 90% impervious if it's the whole building. So you're not really limiting building then, and some of the things that we want to see in our form-based code in our town center district, Main Street district, from letting the building go to 100%, but maybe there's some percentage limitations on off-street parking. That's one potential thought.
Got it. Okay. So we're on item number 1. The staff is looking, hopefully, for some direction here. Do we have any continuing conversation about this at all? Anybody, any further thoughts?
Do you have what you need from us on this, on item number 1?
We've been a little, we've given him kind of different.
I think, direction, do we want to see it, how we have it right now is, it sounds like people are maybe interested in parking maximums. Do we want to see that in our listed approach that we have now in a nice table form, or institute some type of, percentage maximum? And then it does seem like there's a consensus to maybe have no minimum requirements. So I think those would probably be the two things. Do you want to see a maximum? Is it in table form, or is it done by more of a percentage?
Thoughts? Anyone? Yes, please. I'm going to go to Mr. Duval, please.
Thank you. For some of the districts, the parking issues can be addressed with the conditional use permit, right? Like the churches or the schools and things like that in residential districts. So I think we have that opportunity to be as clear as we can in the code that a developer, the entrepreneur, as Ms. Woodward had mentioned, can do their thinking and come up with solutions that they present to us before or without having to go to a conditional use permit would be ideal. But I think there's also that subset that we'll deal with in a conditional use permit process, and I think we can have the conversations about, the sky's not, you can't pave everything because it's easy. I share a little bit of the, that's an extreme example to express the fear, but I think some guidance there would be helpful to say that it's not the whole thing. So the green space, the imperviousness, or using green parking, if you would, where you have vegetation coming up through, would be examples of how you can do perhaps a compromise that you let folks do.
Mr. Gorham.
I'll segue into talking about number 10 here. I think we've kind of almost talked about this a couple times. Consider revising the language to limit rear yard parking on unimproved surfaces, or green parking surfaces, perhaps. Perhaps that's the way we need to look at it. Where are we at? Is this okay now in our current code?
So my thoughts for this is it's always been okay to park in, essentially your rear yard. Corners are a little bit more difficult because you have kind of two front faces to a house. So as long as it's behind the side face as well as the front face, you can park on unimproved surfaces, which are grass. The thought process behind this, should rear parking be limited to maybe kind of your typical rear yard setback, which would be the first 20 or 30 feet of your backyard, and not have it across the entire yard? So that was one idea that staff was coming. You could still put an improved surface back there if you'd like to park, as long as you're meeting your impervious surface. But we do get quite a bit of complaints, specifically on corner properties, where they drive vehicles over the curb, and they're just kind of parked all along that entire backyard. Very visible, and it's across the entire backyard. There's nothing that prohibits that in the code currently or in our past code.
Thank you. There is a group home in my neighborhood that has an average of 4 to 6 cars parked on the yard. And sometimes I think, well, gosh, that's wrong. And then I think, do I want the 4 to 6 cars parked on the street? Would it be worse to have them parked on the street? So, and I think it's worth discussing. I think there could be a compromise, like you say, where within a certain range, go for it. But when you start parking cars in between houses, which I've seen in my neighborhood, perhaps we're crossing a line when we do that. And then, I'm probably stating the obvious here, but when we talk about parking minimums, we still have to consider ADA requirements that they can't be there. They'll have to be still somehow.
Yep, so that was just like the one that we did for Teeny Bubbles conditional use permit. There's no parking requirements in the town center district, so that part was exempted, but that's part of the building official review. So there is the ADA requirements for that, no matter what.
Good, I like it.
Anyone else?
So I do have one other thought kind of for that first one, like you had brought up, and Commissioner Duval did. So a lot of these uses, and we could look further into it, are conditional uses. So if you hypothetically didn't have a minimum requirement for, say, churches or schools, you're essentially working with the developer on the conditional use permit to, allow what the commission and what city council wants for parking there, not overdoing it. But the minute there's a minimum requirement, really that has to be put in unless there's a variance done by it. So the conditional, if you exempted it for schools and churches, the conditional use could still add it back to it, but they would still be required then to do the minimum unless there was a variance procedure done towards it.
Understood. Comments? I'll just, one last thought here on this. Just generally the parking lots that have come before us that I'm thinking of recently in the last maybe 18 months, the school district 181, where we had parking lots where we were discussing the islands with plantings in them to push snow removal into, lighting and blah, 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 blah. That kind of felt right to me. So I guess I'm feeling like parking lots generally are okay as long as we kind of tend to making them look well and perform well as far as our runoff and our vegetation, the screening, and those types of things. So I don't know that we've given you clear direction on this one yet, but
I think
I'm hoping you say yes so we can move on to number 2. But
So, yeah, I think we're good on that. I think we can move to number 2 here, which is developing a potential tiered approach for multifamily dwellings. From a staff perspective, I do think that this would probably be the right approach for multifamilies, where a studio spot, or a studio apartment doesn't need potentially 2 1/4 spaces. I still do think that there's a need for parking requirements for residential properties within the city of Brainerd and residential zoning districts. The whole part about the form-based code and how we did it is if a property fits and can potentially have more dwelling units, we can increase that size. But we have that garage requirement as well as 2 off-street parking requirements. So that really kind of prohibits somebody from taking a small house on a 50 by 150 lot and splitting it into 4 units. All of a sudden, you don't have off-street parking requirements, could have issues then with the neighborhood. So I do believe in residential situations it makes sense, specifically for multifamily though. I think the 2 1/4, when we started adding up, potential developers coming in for 80 units, you're looking at, such a high number of off-street parking requirements. When we did speak with other cities, this is actually previous to what Dylan did, they were having to variance it all the time. So I think a tiered approach would probably be the right approach for multifamily development.
very good. Any thoughts on this one? I'll jump in. I 100% agree on this. I would like to see some version of language that prevents the average larger house in a residential neighborhood being turned into a fourplex. I think they need space for parking and or storage. So I think we've kind of got it right, and I think that generally the tiered system supports that. So that's just my thoughts on that. Anyone else? Okay. We're going to move on to number 3, please.
Yeah, so next one is accessory dwelling units. Right now, there'd be essentially a 2-space requirement for that, similar to like a single-family home. There would not be a garage requirement. Maybe also include this in some type of tiered depending on how many bedrooms are there, maybe this is a tiered approach as well. So if it's a smaller accessory dwelling unit, it's maybe only one bedroom, you don't have the 2-space requirement in it. So that's kind of staff's perspective on this as well.
And back to us. Yes, please, Mr. Duval.
Sure. So maybe a friendly amendment to that concept, James, would be to consider the ADU and the primary when you think about the tier, so that we're not overshooting. So it would fall, in my mind, into that multifamily dwellings kind of a strategy.
Yep. I think that makes sense.
I agree. Anyone else? Oh, we're trucking along here. Number 4. 4? Yes, 4.
So number 4 was just consider leaving exemptions in place for parking minimums. So I think in residential, it seems like that's what the commission's looking for. Do we leave parking minimums in for other ones? It seems like the minimums and leaving our exemptions in place is what the planning commission was looking for.
Anyone object to Mr. Kramvik's summary or appraisal of our position? Me neither. On to number 5.
So number 5, we talked about kind of as well, consider parking maximums in the Main Street, Town Center, and Commercial Corridor districts. I think we covered this kind of within the first one as well. First one was maybe relegated a little bit more towards our residential zoning districts, but I think we got the information we needed from that one in this one.
Anyone want to chime in on number 5?
If I could.
Please,
if I
Mr.
could
Duval.
Bundle 5 and 6 together and go back to the topic of joint parking agreements. I think that's kind of the opportunity in the Main Street and Town Center areas here to be able to try and share those spaces that, so that so we don't have separate or vacant areas that could be used for a different use at a different time of day or different time of week.
Just kind of add to number 6 there. Thought process, so right now there's no requirements whatsoever for residential uses within the Main Street and Town Center district. I do know that the Parking Commission, I wasn't a part of it at the time, but did really discuss this and, what does this look like for, parking for residents down here? How does that affect businesses downtown? So one, potential, I think there was, I can't remember which town it was it Winona? And some of them in their business district are required just kind of not like they did for their other residential zoning districts, but had a smaller minimum requirement for those. So, one thought is, do you have even just a half a space requirement per unit in those? It is more dense and it is tougher to find parking, but at least there would be some responsibility, to look for parking requirements. Certainly could be done through, those agreements by other property owners. And this would only be obviously for new places that are built, so it wouldn't apply to any existing residential place. But this is something that I was kind of thinking about. Should there be, even a small parking minimum for any new builds?
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Kramvik. I'll just chime in here real quickly. As a member of the Parking Commission, we held several town hall meetings, and I will say that one of the overwhelming comments that we received when canvassing downtown Brainerd business conflicts was that the residences were taking up the business parking spots during the day, and they either weren't enforced. So a lot of the mindset of enforcing if you have a residence, you have to provide for this amount of parking in place X, Y, or Z, was to eliminate those resident units from parking in business spots in downtown. So that was the driver there. Now, part of that could be certainly enforcement on kicking them out after the 2 to 3 hour maximum and kind of cycling them through. But the overwhelming complaint we heard, generally speaking, as the Parking Commission is that residents of downtown Brainerd were parking in the business spots and just parking there all day long without enforcement. So that was kind of the mindset of saying, look, if you're going to open a 11 unit apartment or whatever in downtown, you need to have some version of provision for where these people are going to park, not just say, hey, it's on your own. So that was all.
That's the value, I think, of the parking agreements there, to negotiate those on the front end.
I agree, Mr. Duval, and I also think it's incumbent upon the enforcement as well. If we don't rely on our enforcement to kick the tenants out of what hypothetically should be business spots, then that's where, to me, the problem starts to reveal itself.
And Mr. Chair, I can just add that
Yes, please.
as a person that works downtown every day, that parking enforcement is non-existent at this point. It's just not happening.
100% agree.
If you park the wrong way and you go tail in with your pointing out, you'll get a ticket for that. That seems to get ticketed really fast.
But if you're nose in, you can park there virtually. Yeah.
Hours. And maybe if we get into sharing and stuff, maybe the city could share some of the muni lots with the people that live downtown. I'm just saying.
Correct, and as the parking commission, when the parking commission discussed this, we said, hey, look, there's nothing wrong with parking in some of these lots, whether they be, railroad lots or wherever. So you just have to say, hey, this is where our tenants are supposed to park, not in front of.
And buy the spots.
Correct, exactly. So it seems like an enforcement thing to me as a big part of this factor, but that's just my two.
Yeah, so now all, there still is no parking requirement within the Main Street or Town Center District for almost all uses. But 5+ is now a conditional use permit, so parking could be required and negotiated with the developer. Does the commission want to see some type of minimum, even at like a half a space, just to make them aware that there'll be some type of parking requirement there if they are going to be adding these spaces, or do you think it should be just left up to conditional use permit?
Good question, Mr. Kramvik. Anybody have an answer?
Mr. Chair, one model that comes to mind is what was done at the tiny home development, where for the health facility, we did parking deferments. And those could be, that deferment could be withdrawn if circumstances were demand. And that could be a strategy to say, not to have too high of a minimum, since it sounds like our intention is to go towards maximum. But if you feel like there are parts of the town that, or the city, that would benefit from having some minimum reserve out there without getting overdeveloped, we could use that deferment piece as a tool and not require the full development or the full presentation of the parking minimum, but that there is enough set aside and the city retains that ability to say, it's not working out, let's get some more parking in here. And that could be a strategy we could use there.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. Direction? Do we have direction here?
So it seems like the conditional use permit process might be more of the route to go on that, rather than installing a minimum requirement, a half a space, a minimum requirement for Town Center and Main Street.
It's complicated. Yes, please.
It seems like we could take two approaches. Either you can say you have to have 2 spots or conditional use it down, or you only have to have a half a spot and conditional use it up.
Up, right.
I don't know which is better, but I think that's your two.
The one thought is, if you at least have a half a space, they have to begin thinking about, maybe going to get an agreement with an adjoining neighbor. They're not looking at the code, seeing that, okay, there's no requirement here. I'm not going to figure that into my plans or development plans for this because there's no requirement. So that was one of the thought process, to at least have a bare minimum requirement of a half a space per unit. So they're at least starting to think about that. And then, it maybe forces them to start, asking other businesses for, parking agreements.
Yeah, I feel like coming forward with some version of a parking plan is the right thing on these sizable developments. And I honestly feel like if the enforcement is there, this will all kind of sort itself out naturally. But I think we're on some version of at least a minimum or a parking plan for sizable considerations down in this district for sure. So
Sounds good.
anyone have any differing thoughts? Yes, please, Mr. Ball.
Clarification point. James, if we were to do a deferment option, does that require us to go through a conditional use? Or can that be, the standard is that you will plan on a half a spot and one deferred. You know, something like that can we go that?
We could put an option for a parking deferment as, part of the minimum. So, yeah, if they wanted to expand or something else triggers it, or if it's some type of mixed-use building, that could, if it's written into code, and that's how it is right now for some of our districts, that they can do that parking deferment, but it's typically done through the conditional use process, which it would be in this case.
So the thinking is to allow the developer the opportunity to solve their parking needs. And there's going to be cost and negotiations to be able to get that. And so they can plan on a particular amount, but also knowing that they may need to provide additional if the city makes that request at a future point in time. And so to me, then that doesn't necessarily have to send somebody into a CUP process in order to get a bonus or depreciation of parking load. That's just, if we could build a mechanism in there that into the code that doesn't require them to come here in order to be able to get their project rolling.
Right. Anything? Please. Oh,
So we're working towards middle ground here, and I think if we look at what an extreme would be, if we're unable to have the manpower to enforce the current parking, if we're unable to find reasonable minimums and maximums for development that encourage growth where we want it, pick up negotiations, I think the underlying threat here right now is people either abide by the current parking restrictions or we have to go back to meters.
No.
And that's a discussion nobody wants to have. We got the feedback on that. But if it comes back to something that's self-enforced and we don't have the manpower to come out and say, we're going to be there every couple of hours to make sure that people who are parking where they're supposed to be parking are parking there, that's another discussion that comes around. If people are expecting the city to foot the bill for parking spaces, then the city has to make accommodations to be able to foot the bill when we have a manpower shortage.
yeah.
And that might be electronic.
Very well might be. That was the recommendation that came out of Parking Commission. Unpopular as it may be, that was the recommendation. Okay. Irregardless of whether we have consensus here, we're moving on to number 7. So consider requiring bicycle parking spaces in commercial districts.
So one of them did mention bicycle parking. Is that something that we want to require? Could it be a substitution? So that's really just a discussion topic if Planning Commission is interested in something like that.
Mr. Duval.
Got the lean in the peripheral vision, did you? I wonder whether we're ready for that. Do we have the bike traffic? If it were Crosby, where you have the trail systems and everything there, and I could see that would be valuable, but are we there yet? And we want to be there, right? Walkable, bikeable, but are we there yet that we want to be able to take a space or a percentage of spaces and reserve them for bikes? And do we have enough to justify that space?
Yes. Mr. Kramvik, have we ever in the history of Brainerd received a complaint of somebody parking a bicycle in a place where they shouldn't have?
I don't believe so.
We have.
Yeah.
Okay, please enlighten us.
It goes back to when they did the city landscape, when they did the streetscape downtown. They did the streetscape, and I just remember it was a city council person that was complaining about a bicycle that was parked in front of a Front Street Cafe for far too long. And I'm just saying, I don't know anything about this, but I believe sometimes maybe people have taken it into their own hands to remove bikes that have been there for more than 2 years. I've heard urban legend that that's happened. And now I can complain about something I first complained about 10 years ago. When they first did the streetscape, right? They had dual parking things. They had dual things, so there were these kind of loops, and that you could put 2 bikes there. And you could actually put 4 bikes. You could get 2 bikes on either side. And there must have been something wrong with them. They came back about a year later and removed them all and replaced them with single ones, which I thought was a step backwards right there. And I'm telling you, downtown on a summer day, they get filled up. They really do. So As a bicyclist, that's my experience.
Please, Tiffany.
Well, I'm not a bicyclist, but I work with a lot of bicyclists. And I think that doing this is part of how we get there. To Mr. Duvall's point, is that doing something like this is how we get there. I'm not super interested in putting in a like requirement, but I like the idea of being able to offset parking spaces with bike spaces. That gives the, business owner the opportunity to say, yes, this business is gonna have a lot of bike people and we're gonna offset, we're gonna need places to put bikes and that means we don't need places to put cars. Or be like, nope, we're gonna have a lot of cars and sorry, bicyclists, you're gonna have to park your bike somewhere else. And, if that bridge goes through, who knows? We might have a lot more bike traffic. So I'm optimistic. It's going to happen.
I hope for the day that we are all sitting here having a meeting about what are we going to do with all these bikes in downtown.
I'd like to add an example right now. I know of one specific example in my building where there is not adequate bike storage and there's just nowhere to put them overnight downtown especially. And I see a gentleman in my building take his bike up and down the stairs, 3 floors to the top of the building to the apartments because that's where there's safe bike storage. And it's just, there has to be a better way to make this something that more people want to do downtown. We have all the amenities downtown. It should be
And I think beyond downtown.
easier
too.
to live downtown without a car.
Easier to live in all of Brainerd without a car.
Anyone else? I'll just say that I feel like bicycle parking should be part of the, not necessarily the particular commercial space owner, but just as a general policy of the city of Brainerd to, when we're developing sidewalks and pathways and that, to put in a couple hoops to lock a bike up downtown. So I don't know, or in places where it seems appropriate. So I think in general, I'm against requiring a particular parcel owner to say you have to put in bicycle parking here. I feel like that should be more of a city pathway, sidewalk and street kind of thing. That's my general thought, but I don't know. I could be wrong.
There are places where we really can't do it. Because you need to have the pedestrian, to however wide it has to be. Can't remember what that acronym is, but, so there are places where we can't put it in the city right of way or, so, I don't know. I like the idea of giving them the option.
Well, maybe some version of an incentive, or some type of a system where the city pays for the rack if you put it in, or something like that would be maybe something.
There are times with, Mr. Chair, with the bike where, for instance, I had meetings with the Riverfront Committee for a few years over at Tyrell Hills, where the new chamber office over there. The only place to lock up a bike was up all the way onto close to the highway around a light post. I mean, you seriously had to search around for a place that looked like it was reasonable. You can put them around, like no parking signs, but then you still have this hypothetical they could lift the whole bike right off and walk off with your bicycle. And that way, so I don't know, I like the idea of at least including bikes. I don't see it as having to be a requirement, but somehow let's keep the bikes in the discussion. That's all I'm saying.
I think what I'm hearing here is some version of incentivized
Maybe, yeah,
version
incentive.
of parking bikes, not necessarily mandatory.
Sounds good?
All right, we're gonna move on to number 8. We're getting there, guys.
So yeah, really, number 8's probably the last one. I think we kind of discussed the last two, but simplifying the required parking space section and converting it to a table. If you had viewed any of the ones on there, I think that certainly makes sense to do rather than listing it out the way that we do.
Yes.
I agree.
Sounds good.
That makes a consensus. 9 and 10, we feel like we've already kind of generally covered those. Do you want to talk about done improved or anything?
I think we pretty much covered those.
Okay, very good. Anyone have any final thoughts on this before we move on? Okay, we're going to jump in. Oh, please.
Simply, I thank you for putting the research in and presenting some options for us and the additional research you'll be doing to follow up.
what he said.
Sounds good. And I think, kind of next steps, kind of the plan, I think it'll be 1 month later, because we did this research kind of ahead of time rather than as part of the code. I think we're looking for probably about 2 months to create this code, bring that back to Planning Commission. We'd also, at that point, would want the Parking Commission to take a look at it as well, once we have a preliminary code in place.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can
Yes,
I add
please.
one more comment?
Yes, please.
Since my commenting time is limited.
We'll get it all in.
I want to get it all in. So I have one more thing that I'm a little passionate about. Covered parking is very big in different climates, whether it's to protect from heat exposure and sun exposure, or from weather exposure, like we happen to be dumped on a lot by snow in this climate. Occasionally, even all spring. But we're seeing an increase in bike traffic multi-season. People are winter riders, they're summer riders. And I think incentivizing or possibly looking for future development opportunities for covered parking for bicycles would be a phenomenal benefit for the community. Especially if there was a designated area downtown that was covered parking for bikes.
I like it. Other than just the little bag dispenser for your seat. Right? I totally agree, yes. Very good. Thank you. All right, anything else? All right, we're going to move on to our next new and exciting item. This is 7B. This is discuss the detached accessory structure setback requirements in Shoreland Overland District. Please, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So staff has been approached by 2 people since the adoption of our new zoning code that are located on riparian lots within the city. So riparian lots, you have to be part of the Shoreland District, so that's within 500 feet of the Mississippi River or 1,000 feet of a lake, which would be Lake Gilbert or Rice Lake. The previous code would have allowed the property owners to construct a shed or detached garage in the front yard, not on the lakeside. And the reason for this is because sheds and garages really aren't allowed on the lakeside by shoreland ordinance. So there is a provision in the code to allow them to have a shed in the front yard. The current code does not allow properties other than those located in the Garden Living District to construct accessory structures in the front yard. In the Garden Living District, they're allowed to put them within 25 feet of the front property line. From my recollection, the Planning Commission didn't discuss this in great detail in the previous meetings or workshops, and being that a couple people did come looking to see what their options were, staff would like to bring this matter to the Commission for discussion. So staff's first inclination when people did come in is wondering, okay, did we not provide the right exemptions? But after further review, I included multiple options within here that multiple zoning districts, rural living 1, contemporary neighborhood 2 zoning districts, traditional neighborhood districts. So allowing all residential zoning districts, which we did in our previous code, to exempt accessory structure front yard requirements for riparian lots could result in front yard sheds and garages along such city streets as Bluff Avenue, Tyrrell Drive, Hawkins Drive. And if you picture going down those roads, it's not something that you'd typically see or wouldn't fit the character of the neighborhood. Garden living, that probably makes up potentially 1/3 of all riparian lots, and in those it would fit with the character. It does make sense for those. So staff does see that that there would be potential difficulties along such roads as Wonderland Park and Easy Street, as these are typical lake lot developments that currently have accessory structures on the lakeside. However, opening it up like we previously had, creates difficulties in some of our other zoning districts and probably doesn't fit the character. So with that, staff doesn't recommend any changes to the zoning code, but would like the Planning Commission to have a discussion to see if the Commission does have any alternative ideas for this section of code.
Thank you, James. Okay. I'll bring it back to us here for any discussion. This is a kind of a convoluted, complicated question here with a lot of what I call what ifs. And I'm going to just open it up to the group here for anything that they have come up while reviewing this packet as what ifs.
Chair?
Yes, please, Mr.
Clarifying
Duval.
question for James. Are sheds and detached garages, are those allowed by right? Or do we need to do need to get some sort of a permit to do that?
So sheds are now administrative permits within the city of Brainerd, and detached garages are building permits. So they do have to come to the city for that. The other part, I guess, that I failed to mention, options for, currently for Easy Street, which is Contemporary Neighborhood 1, would be for then a variance. So variances, you have to fit the character of the neighborhood, which certainly a shed on that side on Easy Street would fit the character of the neighborhood, and then also practical difficulties, which certainly in staff's opinion would meet the criteria. They're not able to put it on the other side because of the Shoreland District regulations. So that'd be, right now, that's really the option for Wonderland Park Road. Easy Street would be to request a variance.
Thank you. And follow-up, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
please.
So, as I read the shoreline ordinance, these structures would have to be double the setback from the ordinary high water. I don't see that they're excluded from being back there, but they have to be double, and if they aren't, the alternative could be that they're substantially screened from view by water, vegetation, from the water by vegetation or topography.
Yeah, so they would still have to meet the structure setback unless they were a water-orientated structure. So they'd have to meet the 75 feet. And if they did some type of screening from it, then that would be fine. So it's not excluded. I would say especially in some of these other lots that maybe have that were older development, a lot of homes are closer than that 75 feet. So it does make it difficult to put that accessory structure on that side. But yeah, if they are beyond, and they say they're 150 feet back from the water, they would still be able to put it with some screening, or, potentially there's already trees there that are screening it.
So with the photographs that you've provided, or the aerial images that you provided in the packet, to me, the Easy Street example and the 14th Avenue there across from Lum Park would be examples where screening could make them compliant with the ordinance, right?
If they met the 75 feet.
In addition, if they meet the minimum structure setback from the water and they are properly screened, then they would be allowed back there, and that wouldn't be a problem. When I look at the images for Bluff Avenue and for Tyrol Drive, the key word is Bluff Avenue, and Tyrol is very similar. We've got a very steep drop-off, and there are, in addition to the regular setback, there's a setback from the top of the bluff, correct? And
There
so
is.
when I look at where those houses are, and if you throw the contours on, it's pretty apparent that the structures are pretty tight. All of them in Tyrol Hills, I say, would probably be really tight, that you wouldn't be able to get, a shed or something in that backyard. I would look at a particular property on the Bluff Avenue example, right at the corner of the 45 there. That property, the big triangle property that thank you, Sean. That particular one, it looks to me, would be another one where you really probably can't get a structure back there because of the fact that bluff, it really encroaches on that property. To me, those would be examples where variances would work very appropriately, so you'd be saying, well, the hardship is that you've got the bluff here and you've got to maintain the setback, which then, given that the structure is here, the other option is that we have to put it on the street side or the front of the house. So I think, your conclusion by looking at those examples, I think your conclusion would be appropriate, that what we've got seems to work, and where we can anticipate problems, we can either address them by making a vegetation screening requirement for the property owner, or they would have to seek a variance to put it on the front of the structure because they're abutting a bluff or something like that. So I think that recommendation seems pretty solid.
Thank you, Mr. Duval. Anyone else? I just want a couple quick thoughts here. I generally agree. I think that as we've got it written, I think that it's really, really close. One thing that I would like to pose to the group as well as James is that in-ground swimming pools are considered an accessory structure, and I think this is a discussion we should have specific to just swimming pools, or accessory structures apply to a lot of things that are not what we think they are, sheds and garages and those types of things. And I would like to ask the group if they have any appetite for having a discussion on some accessory structures that are not really accessory structures, which may or may not be applicable to this rule. So, James, any thoughts on that as well?
Actually, swimming pools have come up a number of times, in-ground as well as above ground, and how they fit into accessory structures and how it fits in with the shoreline district. So I think that would certainly be a good discussion topic.
Thank you, James. And just a little background, I deal with this in my work all the time. The county and different municipalities have a lot of different rules regarding swimming pools, whether they are or are not an accessory structure. And I just want to make sure we get this right for people if they have any ambitions of an in-ground swimming pool in Brainerd, especially shoreline district or bluff setback type. So just throwing it out there as maybe a potential future item to talk about. So, but otherwise, I generally agree with this. Any other thoughts? Okay, our discussion item correctly, not looking necessarily.
Yep, just a discussion item. I think we got what we needed, and I do agree that I think at a future time, it would be a good idea to talk about swimming pools and other accessory structures.
Thank you, James. And hearing, unless anyone else gives me a head nod or anything, I'm going to move on to our public forum. Last chance. Okay, here we go. We're going to open our public forum at 7:26. Is this you, sir? No? Okay. No, sir. You've been sitting here the whole time. I was thinking this guy's going to come up and talk to you in public forum, but nope. Anyways, I'm going to open it anyways. 7:26. This is our chance for any citizens to come forward and speak before the commission with anything they have that items that are not on the agenda. Option number one, and second time, and third time, and I'm going to go ahead and close the public forum, same time, 7:26, and we're going to move on to staff reports. Number 9, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this being Teresa's last meeting here, just like to thank her very much for all the work that she's done, all the great comments and considerations for Planning Commission, and we've really appreciated it.
Thank you.
I guess the only other thing to update Planning Commission would be the cryptocurrency facility. Right now, they've purchased the property. So that was finalized. The other thing that they're working on is actually a revised site plan. So they're no longer looking at, most likely no longer looking at doing the shipping containers, which was part of the interim use part of it, but actually building a primary structure on the site, which would house all of the data machines as well as have an office to the side of it as well. So right now it's very preliminary, but that's something that they're considering building within the confines of the zoning code.
Thank you, Mr. Kramvik. I was worried that our feedback on the security shed that did not meet the setback was what derailed this entire project. I'm happy to know that that was not what derailed this entire project, or at least temporarily put this. Please, Dylan, do you have anything? Sean Strong. All right, very good. I'm going to bring it to commission member reports. Still got in the agenda. I'm going to start on this end. Anything?
Well, I would first of all just like to thank Teresa for her service on the commission. You've been very insightful and brought, I think, a very healthy business perspective to the table, as we each bring a unique piece to the table, which has been what I've fully enjoyed about this commission, and I appreciate all you've done there. And thank you for serving as vice chair this past year and then again this year, which makes it uncomfortable. We're going to have arm wrestling over the vice chair here probably at our next meeting. But thank you. We're going to miss you a lot.
I'll come and watch that.
You'd be. You can find us on YouTube.
I'll just echo the same comments. We're going to miss you, Teresa. We'll miss you downtown. Absolutely.
Very good. I'll say the same thing. Is there any way, if we gifted you some property inside the city of Brainerd, is there anything we could do just to keep you on? Just please let us know. But
probably do that.
oh, well, good to know. All right. Well, we'll keep that in mind. But thank you so much for your service. And to all of us who serve on this commission, it's a thankless job in many ways. Tiffany, anything?
Just that, you know, it's a thankless job, but today you get the thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you're,
Yeah, you get the thanks when you leave.
yeah.
That's how it works. Last meeting.
Deferred, thanks deferred, right?
I'd like to add that I have thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been a tremendous learning experience. I came into it not knowing a whole lot about the functions of the code and how we were working through these issues. And I feel like we have made a very positive change. I'm very proud to have been a part of it. It's experience that I'm going to carry forward, knowing that there are other places trying to make the same changes. And I have really enjoyed this type of work and hope to be able to continue it.
Good, thank you. Well, we have 10 seconds to get out of this meeting under 90 minutes. So actually, it's clicking down. So somebody, we got a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
We got a second. Is all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.